Welcome back to the Evolving Warfighter. My name is Dr. Franklin Annis, and today I have a very special guest with me, Marcus Aurelius Anderson. He was a former infantry soldier that injured himself catastrophically while in training. And it was an injury significant enough that really forced him to take a look at his own philosophical beliefs to deal with a life-changing injury set in terms of how to move forward when your whole world's been upended. And since that injury, he's really found direction and value, and he's written about his experiences in the book called Gift for Adversity, which is a wonderful intro book for several different methods and topics on philosophy, both Western and Eastern philosophy, on how to deal and use hardship to better oneself. So I'm excited to have him on and to have a chance to talk to him about getting a little more detail about some of the topics he addressed in his book. So welcome, and thank you for taking the time with me today, sir.
And thank you for having me today, Doctor. It's an honor to be here. It was also an honor to share the stage with you at stoic-x here recently. So that was an amazing lineup, lots of great material, and tremendous amount of quality and all of that. So
yeah,
thank you.
So I guess we'll throw out a plug for modern stoicism there. So hopefully in the next few months, I think by November, they'll start slowly releasing some of the topics. But yes, it was a great chance to have a collection of military stoics come and talk about various subjects.
Well, I mean, Donald Robertson's amazing. And then having Ryan Holiday interview, I mean, come on, there's all kinds of people on there. If you didn't get something out of that, then you better check your pulse as far as I'm concerned.
So we'll get into it and say, for those that haven't read the book, can you talk about kind of this big injury and what it meant and how it changed your life?
Absolutely. The Gift of Adversity is the name of my TEDx and the name of my book. And I know that a lot of people now don't really read books. I'm almost 50, so I loved reading books, and that was my answer to really get a lot of material. But I know that now people are more about Audible, or even if they watch the TEDx, it's 13 minutes. And I know that's a long time in YouTube space, but that can give them an idea of what's going on. But what happened was when I was 38 years old, I joined the infantry. My great uncle was my biggest male role model, and he passed away right after I got divorced. And at the time I was working on my doctorate in chiropractic school. So that was sort of a 1-2 punch where I got divorced. 2 weeks later, my uncle passes. And now I'm really looking at my life like, why am I doing this? Because to me, I was doing this to create a family, to create a practice, to go serve my community with my hands. And to have that kind of taken from me, no kids, and then my great uncle passing, going to his memorial, going to his funeral, seeing the full regalia, seeing the full bird, colonel giving him a eulogy, seeing man after man going up and talking about acts of valor. I'd always wanted to join the military, and I'd always had a reason, an excuse rather, not to. And after being there and seeing all that and experiencing that, I was like, I'm out of excuses now. I'll see if I could get in. And luckily I had somebody that would work with me that would allow me to get the release, because my ASVAB was great. I was in great shape for my age, and I was motivated, and the Army always needs that. So for me, going through infantry school, competing against guys that are half my age, having guys in brown hats that are younger than me screaming at me was a big jump into the pool, but that's what I needed. I needed that real adversity to push me. In the book, you talked about it as well. I talk about martial arts. I started doing martial arts when I was 11, and that introduced me to Eastern philosophy, as well as a lot of kind of like the classical, obviously Stoicism, Taoism, Zen, but even understanding logic, even understand the Socratic method. All these things really come into play. And the thing that I saw was we have to have that knowledge prior to combat, prior to the event, because without it, if we wait until, just like before we were talking, if we wait until they're in the heat of adversity to try to figure it out, all of our faculties are not with us, and we're going to make mistakes. And if it's in the military, men will die. If it's a self-defense situation, it could be us or somebody that we're trying to defend that will be harmed. So if you really take this stuff seriously and you really want to apply philosophy, this is the way and the time to do it. I went through infantry school. I thought that I was that was my big doubt. I didn't know if I'd be able to make it through. I didn't know if my body would hold out. I had younger guys that were breaking ankles, falling down, breaking wrists during ruck marches. I mean, you understand that. Even their hips, which I didn't understand, a lot of them weren't used to that kind of compression. So you're either jumping out of an airplane or just having 100 pounds on your back doing a ruck march. Their body wasn't accustomed to it. So after 2 weeks of my body being resilient and my 38-year-old mind being able to keep me driven, I realized I can do this. I got to my duty station at 10th Mountain. At that time, we were getting ready to deploy. And at that time, 10th Mountain was the most deployed unit in the history of the military, between being attached to people and then doing their own deployments. And then 2012, as we were preparing to deploy, I ruptured a disc in my neck. And that was just from attrition. It wasn't a specific method of onset. It was just from everything building up. But once that happened and I woke up in the morning, I tried to roll out of bed, and my neck would articulate a little bit, but my body would not listen. And I kind of chuckled to myself at first. I was like, oh, the old man's sore. It was after we had done a pretty intense week, and I was going to do squats and deadlifts that same day. In my mind, that Friday night before that, and I thought, oh, my legs are not really working the way they should be. But as I'm there and I can't move, the chiropractor in me comes in, and I start thinking to myself, okay, the evaluation of this is either this is just something that's very temporary, or this is something that's a neurological emergency and I'm in trouble. Luckily, I had a knock on my door that was coming because of the training that we had coming up for an AAR. I screamed through the door, I can't move. They come get me, and I'm on my way to the hospital. They do the MRI, the disc is ruptured. So everything from C5 down is completely immobile. Not only immobile, but I'm having a hard time even breathing at this point. So my diaphragmatic reflex is being affected. And those who knew who Christopher Reeve was, he was the one that was an actor. He was injured when he fell off a horse. That was the same vertebral level. So leading up to that, I had numbness in my hands and my feet, but I thought that it was because it's Fort Drum and it's cold and you're in the field for 3 weeks at a time, but it just wasn't getting better. I was having a hard time even holding onto the pull-up bar, which normally I'm pretty strong. So that was a little bit concerning. When they do the MRI and they start rushing me down to the operating room, that's when I start realizing this is big. This is not something that they can just give me a shot and I go away. And you and I understand the warrior mentality. As dumb as this sounds, even as I'm being rolled down on the gurney, I'm hoping that it doesn't take very long, because at that point I had just been given a team. And all these guys are dependent on me, and we're getting ready to go. And I hope this, I can just get this done and I can get back and I'll be doing PT by next week. But it was much more serious than that. They had to do a complete disectomy, and then they were fusing C5 and C6 together, so it would be completely ankylosed before I would have any ability to even be stabilized and even think about what recovery would look like, or if there would be any sort of recovery. So go in, ask. They're telling me all this as I'm getting ready to go into the surgery. And now I'm like, oh, so once you remove all this pressure from my spine, I'll be good, right? And then it's just crickets. And that's not what you want to hear when it's your life on the line and your physicality on the line. And you're a soldier, you understand. To us as soldiers, as warriors, our physicality is almost the definition of our existence, of who we are, of what we are. That's what we do. And to have that taken away from you so quickly it definitely turns the world upside down for you. Go under, start to go back from 100, get to about 98. And then there was a time when it was just very cold and very dark and very peaceful. And then I wake up in the ICU, and now I'm trying to get my faculties back. Is this a dream? Am I AWOL? I'm in a neck brace at this point, so what movement I did have is completely arrested now, still paralyzed, and I'm trying to figure out what the hell do I do at this point. So there was a lot going on, a lot to process in a 24-hour period. The surgeon comes in after a while and says, "We lost you." And I didn't know what he meant. I was like, "How do you lose me? I'm a 180-pound infantry guy. Got a shaved head, How do you miss me?" But yeah, I wasn't walking. Do you remember that, me? And he said, "No, you flatlined on us a couple of times." And that's kind of the thing that I fixated on, because he kept talking, but it was almost like I could just barely hear what he was saying, and I'm watching his mouth. And he's like, just get some sleep. I'll come back and talk to you. There's 5 stages of acceptance for any kind of grief. The first one is denial, and I was in denial hardcore for the first week. But once I was out of the ICU and they take me back to the unit, and it's like, we're taking you to this part of the warrior transition unit now because you're not going to be getting any better, because the doctors are like, if you're going to get better, it would have happened by now. If you have a hose and there's water going through it and you put your foot on it, you take the pressure off the hose. If it's intact, it should still be working. But with a medical background, you know that it takes 10 millimeters of mercury of pressure to compromise a spinal unit. It just means a nerve. And for those of you that aren't familiar with how delicate the nervous system is, it's like little pieces, little strands of silk. And it balls up into almost like a cord, and it just goes down from the base of your skull to your spine, to the very end of your spine, the cauda equina at the sacrum. And just that amount of compromise can stop that nerve from doing what it needs to do. So if you're a diabetic and that nerve is compromised, you're not going to be able to make insulin. If it's the pancreas, all these kind of things that come together to the central nervous system, it's the master system. In chiropractic, that's what they would always teach. Now, there's more to it, obviously. But if it's a chiropractic problem, then that chiropractic fix is what they would always want to push. Being in that position and being in that place where there was so much damage done to my spine, they were like, let's just survive this. We'll talk about rehabilitation afterwards. And when the doctor's like, the good news is you get to live to tell the tale. The bad news is this is what you're left with. Didn't believe that. Got back to the unit. Now it's like, oh shit, this is real.
So just make sure that I'm tracking correctly. So from the point of injury to the point where you're transferred to warrior transition unit, you're looking at about a 1 week time period?
One week time period, and that's when they're...
So when you're going the warrior transition unit, they're basically saying at that time, hey, you're here to get better to leave the military, or is there any discussion that, hey, maybe a few months down the road, walk back in, or is it all just either vague, not being spoken about? What was that messaging?
And that's what it was, because as you know, all this stuff is compartmentalized. All these areas are compartmentalized. So the PT is telling me one thing, saying, oh, well, you'll be able to, if you can recover, then you can go back into the infantry. So I'm holding on to that. Then another one's saying, oh, there's no way you can go back in the infantry. If you do, you're going to have to reclass. Well, I don't want to reclass. And then there's other ones that are like, you're never going to walk again anyway. Why are you even worried about this? And then there's other ones that are like, frankly, I don't know. So being in that limbo of not knowing what's going on, wanting to know, sitting there in a bed, watching Netflix, they would put earphones in my ears, they would call my family, and I could talk to my mom or my dad. But even then, you stop wanting to talk to them because they're asking the same thing. Have you heard anything? What's going on? Are you feeling any better? And that's when I start to go into that place of anger, start to go into that place of depression. The definition of depression is anger that is directed inward. So for me, at this point, I'm 40. So when everybody else is 40 and they're looking back on their lives and their jobs and their families and their kids and they're happy and they have this incredible career, and I have nothing. I put everything in my life into this one basket, into this one purpose. The goal was to go out, serve my country, kind of fulfill that purpose for me, then go back, use the GI Bill, pay out the rest of my school, and go serve the rest of my community. But there's what we hope happens, and then there's what happens in this life. And the enemy always gets a vote. In this case, the adversity or the enemy was the physicality and the reality of the injury. So being in that place, and they weren't even doing any physical therapy on me, frankly, because they were like, there's just nothing going on. They would put my hands on it's almost like a bicycle. Yeah. Right. And they would just Velcro it to that, and they would move them for me to keep the muscle from atrophying, and they would do a little bit of that on my legs, but that's it. So being in that place and the reality setting in, nobody really knows what's going on. Nobody's going to tell me what's going on. I'm just sort of here, stand by kind of situation. And to not know what's going on, to not know how long it's going to be, that was the most brutal part, because now it just feels like you're in this prison. And for me, the prison was my own body. And that's when all those things kind of come up. So
this is kind of the interesting question. So I know, at least for myself, So when we talk about kind of useful philosophies for dealing with military, I had been introduced to Stoicism in my high school. I got reintroduced in college. I knew that Marcus Aurelius, his meditations were important enough that when I deployed to Iraq, I took a copy of his meditations with me, and it was passed around my platoon. But even having that kind of knowledge, coming back home and watching everything in my life kind of disintegrate, it wasn't until several months later did I realize, hey, I have kind of these philosophies that we can go back and try to find information of. So obviously, a man that's named after Marcus Aurelius, I'm guessing you were introduced to Stoicism fairly young in life. But how long a transition would you say did it take from the point that you got injured to the point where you remembered that you had kind of tools that you could use to fix your situation?
That's the thing. I knew that I had the tools, but it's very different. It's very easy to be philosophical when it's somebody else's headache. It's very easy to have perspective when we're not the fighter in the ring. And to me, meditations, Zen, Taoism, all these ideas, endure if it's endurable, then endure it. That sounds like a bunch of flowery bullshit when you're the guy that's in the fucking bed and your life is not doing what it's supposed to do, and this isn't fair, and you're playing the victim, and you just keep corroborating that cycle of, I did the right thing, I'm a good person, I haven't heard this, why did the universe, why did God, why is this happening to me? And again, that's part of denial. But all the cycles of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, it's not that easy. On a piece of paper it is, but it never happens that quickly. It goes from denial to anger, then you cycle back to denial again because you're still so angry. And then through anger, you eventually bottom out into this place of bargaining where you're like, okay, God, I know I haven't talked to you for a while, but if you let me walk, then I'll be a good person. And then that goes back into anger, which goes back into denial again. And then eventually you get to these places to where you are in that acceptance phase. For me, all these notions, all this idealism, it didn't mean anything because it didn't seem real. So after 4 months of just being livid, I was angry. I was angry at anybody that would walk in the room, even people that were trying to be nice and take care of me. But I was angry the most at myself because I looked at all the opportunities I had wasted, all the things I had taken for granted, the physicality, the intelligence, all this stuff had been just stifled. And I realized that it was because of this hubris, this intellectual ideal that, oh, well, I know better, or, oh, well, this will be fine, or, oh, that won't apply to me, or that happens to other people. But it happens to all of us. Adversity happens to every single one of us. And if you've read Marcus Aurelius' work, or if you've seen anything on the, Daily Stoic, they talk about this and they remind us of this, whether it be memento mori or loving your fate. This idea that it could change in an instant, and it often does. Sometimes there are instances that we don't even realize at that moment that things have changed. But sometimes they're like mine where they hit you sideways and you have no other choice but to face that reality. After 4 months, I basically realized that the anger was not serving me. If anything, it was inhibiting my capacity to have any ability to recover. And I realized I could either play the victim and play that for the rest of my life and just be miserable to be around, or I could change my mindset about the injury. But even that is easy to say.
Yeah.
So what I had to do is I actually took some of what Marcus Aurelius did and combined it with this ideal of Stoicism with Zen and said, okay, it's not about me, but it's still my responsibility. So if that's the case, if I can take myself out of this equation and actually look at it, did anybody benefit from my injury? No, of course not. But then I realized that if I'd have been in Afghanistan, because they kept pushing our deployment back. That was the year that President Obama ran for re-election, if you recall. So that's whenever he told everybody he was bringing the troops back. So they pushed everything completely was off the books. They were like, okay, we're just not going. So you're training, and I have to say honestly that there was some schadenfreude because all these guys that I've been training with, I was like, they don't get to go either. And all the, NCOs and LTs knew that now that the gate was down, they were starting to transfer to other places, which is an indication that it was real. But At any rate, coming back to that place, I realized that the anger was not going to help me get better. And that if I could see somebody benefit from my injury, maybe that would give me a light at the end of the tunnel. And I thought that this injury in my mind would have happened no matter where I was. So if I was in Corrigal Valley, if I was in wherever it was, this injury would have happened. And as you know, for every one man that's injured, it takes two to pull him to safety. So if I'd have been in Afghanistan in a hot zone, my team would have been compromised. Another team would have had to come down, another squad, possibly a platoon. Chinook has to fly into a hot zone to come get me. And it's a huge, huge target, right? So for me, that's when I realized there were dozens of other people whose lives were not directly put in harm's way because of my injury. And we signed the paper, we know that, we understand that. But to me, that was the only thing that I could see that was actually something to be grateful for. And it was real gratitude, real gratitude. Not this bullshit gratitude that everybody's talking about where they talk about and they write in their little journal. I mean like real gratitude. Because real gratitude means that you're grateful for the things that do not even improve you, that you get no benefit from. And that was the first time I had that 360, no BS gratitude. And that was the beginning. I literally said when I realized it, wow, I'm lucky. And that was the cornerstone. And once I had that, I was able to slowly build on, I'm grateful for these people that take care of me. I'm grateful that I have a bed. I'm grateful that I'm in the United States. I'm grateful I'm in this medical system.
Yeah.
And once that began, it took a few weeks, but once I had that real gratitude, that's when I got a little bit of movement back on my left hand. And it wasn't a lot, but you've read the book. It was something. It was something. And that's a lot more than what I'd had for months. And that was the beginning of me being able to at least make peace. If this is what my life was going to be, I could at least endure that.
Yeah. So finding meaning, I think, is kind of critical for kind of,
Absolutely.
well, both veterans or anyone that's really been in a catastrophic injury.
Really.
I used to work with homeless veterans when I worked back in for the Department of Labor in Nebraska, and it was amazing the difference of outcomes between service members that found meaning, no matter how small in their military service, how they could recover from like PTSD or for kind of not negative impacts of other physical or mental injuries. But the service members that just could not find meaning in their service or whatever that injury or kind of critical event was, how that would continue to plague them. And so it's interesting, that little spark of that was enough to get you going.
I mean, that's what we have to have, right? If we can do that cognitive reframe. Because again, I always say adversity doesn't mean anything. It's just the meaning that we attach to it, right? And that's like every philosophy that we know. So it's the way that the event itself is neutral, it's amoral. But the way we give it meaning is what makes everything, because now that evokes the emotion creates thought, and the thought potentially creates action. So you have a person that, this is why we can see people that 5 people see the same event, and 2 people think it's something bad, 2 people think it's something good, 1 person doesn't know what it means, there's just the neutrality to it. But in the end, like you were saying, the purpose, we're the ones that we get to decide what the purpose is, irrespective of what actually happened. So you have people that have been, molested, people that have been sold into sexual slavery, people that have had their entire families wiped out by genocide. I interviewed Master Omri Bon in my book when his whole family was wiped out by the Cambodian genocide. And I remember asking him, I was like, Crew, it's just a sign of respect as a teacher. I was like, Crew, how can you be so happy? He's like, I'm alive. And it made me feel just like, he's right. I mean, how can I be so shallow to realize just the life itself? That's a huge gift. We take it for granted.
But yet, even in your story, everything's like a series of adversities, like climbing a mountain, right? So as soon as you get movement in your hand, then things go backwards, right? So how does that impact you? Yeah,
so when I was speaking to Stephen Pressfield about this, he was saying the same thing, how he was like, the hero's journey is just adversity after adversity after adversity. For me, what happened was I felt arrogant. I felt hubris. well, if I can, they said I overcame that, I can walk this thing off, this paralysis off. And I had some of that. And I started losing the real gratitude. And then all the progress that I had made so quickly slid back, and I went back to square one. And I went back through all 5 stages again. I went back into denial. I went back into anger. I went back into anger hard, but I realized, listen, if this had worked before, even if it's a placebo effect, if it's changing the way my body reacts, I will do that again. And I quadrupled down on that. And then slowly, eventually be able to get back to that place. Slowly was able to get a little bit of movement back, and I didn't take it for granted. I didn't have hubris. I didn't think I was there. The enemy that knocks you out is the one that you underestimate. The punch that knocks you out is the one you don't see coming. So the objective that you take so lightly is the one where you stumble and fall, break an ankle. That's what to me, that was the big takeaway the second time. The first one was actual gratitude. And even Pressfield was talking about that. He said, with resistance is because I feel resistance and adversity are the same thing. I just feel that adversity is a much more adversarial form of resistance. It's much more aggressive. It's much more pressing. It's much more dangerous. And he said, that's what happens. You get to a place where you're almost at the top of the mountain. And if you take your eye off the ball for a second or you lose focus, that's whenever you fall off. So again, I kept moving. So it took almost an entire year from the injury to being able to get to a place where I was able to move a little bit, able to hold a glass or a bottle of water, able to maybe even potentially manipulate a key into a lock. So occupational therapy, physical therapy. And that's when they were like, okay, yeah, we're going to get you out. Don't know what the rating's going to look like. Don't know what, and you understand as well as I do, ratings with the medical in the military. We have this pie, then we cut the pie in half, and you have this, and then technically with this, and blah, blah, blah. So
percentages never add up.
Percentages never add up. It's military math. It's like, well, listen, I died. Shouldn't that count for 100%? Well, technically, yeah, but we only do so. But at any rate, the main thing was I knew that I was going to get out, and trying to figure out what the hell do I do with my life now? Because even now I still have neuropathy from the middle of my forearms to my hands and the middle of my shins to my feet. So it feels like I have on big gloves, or it feels like I have on thick boots. So when I ruck, I'm always stomping that heel to make sure I'm not turning. When I'm running the same thing, when I'm doing pull-ups or push-ups, I'm making sure that I have the best form that I can so that I'm not going to inadvertently hurt myself. I'm training in March. They're doing that Navy. It's SEAL Fit. It's their gauntlet. It's a 2-day, 50 hours straight, no sleep, just push. It's their simulation of Hell Week for civilians. And I just got cleared to do that. So that's what I'm training for right now. That's why the ruck, doing Murph, doing the runs, that's kind of what I'm focusing on my physicality. But even then, it's still not easy. There's a lot of push on that. But that's what I need. I have to have something to keep me going. I did the 4x4 by 38 or by 48 for Goggins this year. And that was amazing. And that really made me open up a lot. I didn't know if I could do it or not. It was my almost like a Misogi, right? Where I was going through that thing where there was at least a 50% chance that I was going to fail. And the SEAL Fit thing, there's a plenty good chance. It'll be in March, so it'll be cold, be in the water, be pushed a lot.
See, my March event is the Bataan Memorial Death March, if they still hold it this year.
I was going to say, and that's 10th Mountain. I mean, the Bataan Death March, I actually got to meet a gentleman that was in it. He came to our unit one time and spoke, and it was, again, the same thing. It was humbling, where we're sitting here complaining that the Wi-Fi is too slow, or, this food's not hot enough. It's like, really? These people were drinking out of ditches and seeing their friends bayoneted in front of them because they didn't want to walk anymore, because they couldn't get any food. How bad your life now? I was like, no, I'm good.
So going through this process, you write very poignantly in your book about being suicidal at a certain period of time. And I'm not sure where in that timeline that would be, but I could imagine it being, particularly miserable in your experience. But you capture something that other philosophers have discussed, and I'll read a quote from Nietzsche so I don't screw it up, but it's the thought of suicide is a great consolation by means of by means of it one gets through many a dark night. And I think the focus on suicide is often a individual's last cry for freedom. So if we can't perceive ourselves having any other choice, we always have the choice to take our own life. And I haven't really ever met anyone that's suicidal that didn't want to improve. And it was just they wanted to escape where they were and didn't see any way of moving forward. So
that's what it is. Everybody that's suicidal, they don't want to die. They desperately want to live. But they can't find any reason to live. They can't find a purpose. And if they try to find these things externally, it's always a one-sided relationship. They have to look inside. They have to accept everything, warts and all, the good stuff, the bad stuff. And there's a lot of bad stuff. And for me, that's why adversity was a gift, because there's no other way that I would have spent that many months in a bed and unpacked every trauma. I unpacked my parents' divorce all the way up to my own divorce, all the way up to my own injury. Thought about every relationship that I had had where I'd been a good person, every relationship where I wasn't, every situation where I had slacked, where I'd intellectually pulled back, where I'd given myself the consolation, where I had this moral high ground to justify my actions. And there's no other way I would have been able to do that sort of unpacking. And the same thing about suicide. I was definitely suicidal, especially at the beginning, but I could even act on it.
Yeah.
And that's what was so disempowering. So it's one thing to understand memento mori and to know that we're going to die. It's another thing entirely to be 40 years old and know that you may spend another 40 years of the rest of your existence on this mortal coil in a bed, mad, a victim, making everyone around you miserable, probably going to die alone because nobody wants to be around that, right? That is a very different thing. So when people are like, well, it doesn't really matter because if I'm dead, I'm dead, if that's what they believe. But I want people to know there are things that are worse than death. And having that kind of physicality taken from you, in my opinion, was worse than death. So at least thinking about suicide, at least having a philosophical discussion in your mind about it. It's almost that same idea you were saying how the Nietzsche quote, it's the same thing. Almost like every person I've ever met that went through Ranger School or went through Delta or Special Forces or SEALs, they always had that point where they wanted to quit. But they would always say something along the lines of, I'll quit tomorrow, or I'll quit after this iteration. So it's the same thing with suicide. If that's what it takes for you to say, I'll wait until tomorrow. I'll wait. I can get through today. I'll wait until this. I'll wait until that. And if you are in crisis, by all means, call somebody, talk to somebody, whether it be a buddy. There's a lot of hotlines that are out there, especially if you're a veteran. But the main thing is understand that that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It just means that you are honestly taking a very cold, hard look at what's going on. And frankly, you don't like what it is. Sometimes what we see in the mirror is not what we want to see. But that's up to us. Again, now what do we do? What purpose can I attach to that dissatisfaction? If I feel like I'm in mediocrity and I feel like I've always been there, that's fine. That's my starting point. This is my rock bottom. Now what are you going to do about it? Now that you've had this realization, what would you like to do with it? And that's what happened to me. I had all this knowledge. I believe like a lot of people did, which was I thought that familiarity was the equivalent of having the actual expertise. So I played football when I was a kid. I'm very familiar with football, but I'm not a football player. Just because I know the rules and I watch it and I understand how to play it when I was a kid, it's not the same as being out there on the field with a professional. I would get crushed right now if I did that. So understanding that you can read an article on philosophy, you can read as many times as you want meditations, or whatever philosophy you want to put in that space. Also understand that until you put it into play, until you internalize it, until you turn it inside out, until you doubt it and throw it away entirely and then reacquire it, until you have done that, you do not have all of this knowledge. And oftentimes it takes a kick in the ass, it takes adversity, it takes a punch in the face to make us really go, wow, this sucks. And then in the military, what do we say? Embrace the suck. Walk it off, suck it up. Nobody cares, keep going. That seems very calloused. But again, that's very much kind of where the small s, stoicism comes in. When I talked about my great uncle giving me that lesson as a young boy, it was the same sort of thing where it was like, listen, if you focus on the hardship, that's all you're going to see. But if you focus on the opportunity, that was all you're going to focus on. And we only have so much mental energy as well as physical energy, clearly. So if I spend any time sitting here beating myself up intellectually, catastrophizing, as Donald would say, if I sit here and just play this over and over in my mind, I'm literally putting more things that are heavy in my ruck that I don't need to. I need to get rid of that weight. What do we say in the military? Ounces equal pounds, right? So even that little ounce of doubt, even that ounce of deprivation is going to make a big impact on how you carry everything else in your life. So choose to carry it stoically, as a Roman would, as Marcus Aurelius says, which doesn't mean that you just don't care about anything else, but it means that you focus on what's controllable, that you understand what the mission is, and that you drive on towards that. Because at the end of the mission, you can spend all the time that you want to look back on it. But if you don't survive it, you will not have that luxury.
So in your time in the Warrior Recovery Unit, did they provide any type of support in terms of kind of the the psychological, philosophical realignment kind of post-injury?
Not really. I mean, no.
We'll have to work on that.
Yeah. The thing is, it's so hard. I mean, we understand there's so many, there's the moral injury, there's the physical injury, there's the psychological injury, and there's the trauma that happened then, there's the trauma that happened to the person before that. And then how many veterans do we know that need medication, that don't get medication, that have the wrong medication, right? It's an incredibly complex question, and it's hard to solve for that. So if you have a person who has been deployed multiple times in a combat zone and they take a pain medication to help numb this pain so they can survive this altercation, but now they come home and they don't have that access, and now they're out. What's the classic example? That person cannot afford these medications. Now they have drug-seeking behavior on the street. And the closest thing is going to be something that's very detrimental and it could cost them their life in the process. And if we follow that thread, that comes back to them just wanting to join to serve their country. I'm not saying that it's anybody's fault, but I'm saying that there are a lot of nuances. There's a lot of undulations within that. And it's impossible to just say, hey, here you go, read this book or do this thing, or here's the steps. Yes, every time they came and talked to me, they asked me if I thought about depression, suicide, of course. But the rest of these things, there wasn't a whole lot there. And I didn't blame anybody for that.
That's one of the reasons why I like the efforts that, I don't know if you're familiar, so Dr. Megan McElleran is developed a stoic-based program called Before Operational Stress, or BOSS, and that she's currently in Canada testing that on Canadian first responders, but they're actually having statistically significant findings about actually using philosophy to treat PTSD and moral injury. And I look forward that kind of continued, scientific research into the use of philosophy, because, I think that philosophy and psychology have always been highly married to each other, but actually having the scientific study of them hasn't always been kind of well addressed. So
that's it. And philosophy is only as good as the person that applies it, frankly. And again, we can plant the seed all day, but eventually they have to do the work. They have to come to that place on their own. And again, for me, even with this knowledge, like I try to read meditations at 11. Went over my head, go back to the bookstore. Hey, is there another book by this guy? They're like, no. It's like, he only wrote one book. And then that person there actually understood, and they were like, this wasn't even supposed to be published, which was kind of interesting. But this is what happened to me at that store. As I'm leaving, I'm in the philosophy section, and I see a book that's faced out, and it has Chinese characters on it that look similar to the characters in my martial arts school. It was the Tao Te Ching.
Okay.
So even at 11 years old, I opened that up and it says, continue to sharpen your blade and it will go blunt. I understood that. And there were only 83 chapters in this thing. There were only 83 pages. Wow. So that was something I could digest. I could wrap my mind around it. Because as we know with meditations, he begins by thanking a bunch of people that I didn't know. I'm like, what? This is a horrible book. What is this? This book sucks. This guy's dumb. I'm named after this idiot. I don't even like this person. But the Stoicism eventually was the place I was able to go to because Taoism was the gateway for me to understand that. And that's why Taoism, Zen, Stoicism, if we look at any great philosophy, there are a lot of similarities. The characteristics, they bleed over into everything. And what do they all come back to? I just posted this before we came on. All this knowledge is useless if we don't have self-awareness, if we don't have self-knowledge. So everybody now wants to read the newest book, take the newest course, listen to the newest podcast, buy the newest course that tells them how to do these things and gives them tactics and tools and strategies. But if they don't know what they want, if they are not honest with themselves and say, listen, there's no way in hell I'm doing all this stuff. There's a new book on the 12 steps to whatever it is for the morning routine that's going to make you uber productive. And they know they can't even get out of bed the first time the alarm goes off. They're sort of lying to themselves. They're hoping to buy motivation that will do the work for them. But that's what I'm trying to tell everybody. The foundation is knowing yourself, doing hard shit, going through adversity. That helps you learn who you are because adversity doesn't tell you who you are. It strips away all the lies that you are not, all the things that you tell yourself that you are, that you're going to start tomorrow, that your diet's going to get better, that you're going to really go for that run tomorrow, or the work's too heavy today, you're going to do it later. In this life, you do not have that luxury of pushing things off. And if you think that you do, that's when you're in trouble. And that's when we slide into mediocrity. And like I say in the book, misery loves company, but not as much as mediocrity. If you choose to not demand more from yourself, there are plenty of other people that can bring you back and wrap their arm around you and give you a beer and say, yeah, I did the same thing. It's okay. Don't worry about it, buddy. I give up on my dreams and ambitions too. I'm saying that if you can take accountability and find purpose, you can make a lot more happen than you ever thought possible. And I'm not trying to say that in like some airy woo-woo kind of way, but I am saying that it comes back to that self-awareness because that makes you take accountability. And Stoicism's all about accountability.
So it's interesting you said that. So the book that really brought me back to Stoicism after my deployment was Emerson's Self-Reliance, but it deals with both. And really the transcendentalists, the American transcendentalists are really the American evolution of Stoicism because, well, Emerson, I think, quotes Marcus Aurelius more than anyone else, but he quotes him under his Roman name, Antonius, so most people don't make the actual connection. So,
yeah, and that's the thing. This stuff, if you think about it, it's all been sort of laid out for us. And it doesn't matter the route that you get there. Musashi says there are many paths to the top of the mountain as long as we get there. So if it's Stoicism that gets you there, if Stoicism gets you to something else that gets you there, that's fine. But it's about knowing that there's other people that have gone through this. There's no emotion that you and I have ever experienced that has not been experienced by other people millions of years ago or hundreds of thousands of years ago and by millions of other people. Everybody feels anger, fear, resentment, love, all these things. But we have to understand that even when the Stoics talk about it, anger is a bad thing, but it's actually good because it shows us that there is something that's not aligned in our belief, our actions, what's going on, the way that we perceive things. And frankly, anger in a lot of ways, we hear about people that have acted out of anger and there's been detrimental things that have happened, but we don't hear about the people that understand that there is anger here, but they can control themselves because of self-awareness and still allow that to create the aggressive patience necessary to push forward, to get to the objective or to right this wrong or to make justice come forward. And that's the part of it. That's why the Stoics are always talking about anger because it's omnipresent. And if you act like it's not there and you just try to put your fingers in your ears and go la, 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 it will get you every single time. So you have to be aware of that. And again, even Jung was like, the best way to understand other people's darkness is to understand our own. So embrace that, understand that. I'm not saying you have to live in that place, but I'm saying to act like it's not there, you do so at your own peril.
So you bring up a great concept in your book, and I'm going to source it back to Admiral Stockdale because at least I think the Stockdale paradox is easy to look up and understand the concept. But it's the ability to number one, hold total optimism for success in your mind, while number two, you look with brutal honesty about the current situation you find yourself in, and then figure out the way to connect the dots between the two. And if you can do both those things simultaneously, you're almost guaranteed to be successful. But if you cannot either maintain optimism or be honest with the situation you find yourself in, you're going to crash and burn.
It's very true. And the other thing about that is it gives you the capacity to detach. It gives me the ability to just work on my process for process sake. I can control the process. I cannot control the outcome. But the more we do the process, the harder that we push ourselves, the longer that we ruck, the more belief that we have. A person who's never done a 100-mile ruck is never going to believe that it's possible. You put 50 pounds on their back and they're going to have a rough day, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that has to go into that. But once you get into where they can do 2 miles, 4 miles, give them a chance to recover, break in those boots, wear that ruck a little bit tighter, wear it the right way, move forward a little bit more. Now they can see incrementally on a long enough timeline they can get there. But what happens to a lot of people is they just see this thing and they put this goal out there. And again, back to this idea of not having any self-awareness. If they hear somebody say, dream big, ask big, I want to be I want to have $100 million. And they put this on their wall, but they don't believe it. Subconsciously, they're not even going to commit to it. And frankly, even if they never get to that amount, if they can still push themselves and still create a process and still create that belief by doing the work, that's how we get there. That's why we have to push ourselves. That's why we have to demand more from ourselves. Here's the other part. Goggins talks about the 40% rule, right? David Goggins. For those of you that are, I'm sure everybody here knows it, but Goggins says that when you feel like you're about to give up, your body's at 40%, you have more. What I try to do with my clients is I try to push them to 80%. I want them to double that, but I still intentionally leave 20% for adversity. And I don't mean the adversity of being tired, being sore. I mean the adversity of a pandemic, of war, of financial ruin, of a family member getting cancer, right? I mean the real shit. That's what I'm talking about, because that's going to come whether we're aware of it or not. So we have to build in a little bit of that cushion. The other thing is, if we can even get from that 40% where we want to give up and then double that, we're still getting a lot more out of not only ourselves, but now we're inspiring those around us to show what is possible. So when I'm show my workouts on my progress, I'm not doing it to show off. I'm just showing people. It's like, listen, this is where I came from. This is what I'm trying to do now. Maybe you guys can get up and go for a walk this morning, right? That's the goal.
Yeah. Well, and it's amazing what you can do if you use that iterative approach, because most people don't understand the true capacity you hold.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's exactly it.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you track, but I do kind of extreme long ruck marches. But just the idea of, can you throw a ruck march or a rucksack on your back, and could you walk 50 miles? It's like a good army back in World War I could march 40 miles in that day, and they could do that several days in a row. Now you say that sounds pretty insane, but go out there. It'll take you a year to train for, but it will get to the point where after a year, it's like no big deal. 40 miles, yeah, that's whatever. 10 hours of walking, and then it's done. Not a big deal. And then it's like, man, can I do 50? Can I do 60? And so far I've hit 62 miles in a day. So amazing. Can I hit 80? Because that's what my kind of all-star educational theorist named Captain Alden Partridge lived early 19th century. He was said to be able to march 60 to 80 miles a day, and he could do that for days on end. But just that capacity is really practice. It's not even extreme fitness. It's just, are you willing to put in the time?
That's what it is. And even for us, we would do a 50% ruck, and they would drop us past the target up to 15 miles. So if we're doing a 25 mile with 50%, and then you still have to be battle ready once you get there to be able to fight to the objective, like you said, it's very different. As a civilian, we think that we're in shape if we have a six pack or, we can do 100 push-ups. But military combat is very different. And even the Romans, if you look at everything that we do, again, that was based on their capacity to carry a 68-pound shield, to walk with that to this place to actually be able to fight. What do? We go somewhere, we conquer the territory, and we put a big square and we defend it, because that's what the Romans did thousands of years ago, because that's kind of how they did stuff. We call it a forward operating post now, but that's what we have to do when we're trying to do that kind of stuff. But they gave us kind of an idea of what was possible. And then as nutrition, technology, equipment got better, we evolved with it. And now we see that they're even putting, super soldier kind of suits on people, or using, I saw that somewhere in the UK, they were actually using walk bots with them to go on patrol. So it's almost like like War of the Worlds 2, where you have this thing that can go and collect your data and your intel, which is both scary and exciting at the same time.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to your injury. If we don't figure out a way to make just the basic load of soldiers lighter, we're basically exceeding human capacity to the point where the second we send infantrymen into combat, they're breaking down physically, and it's just a matter of we hope that they physically survive long enough to come back home from a deployment. But then you're faced with that terrible calculus of, are you going to be in the face of an enemy and say, I'm going to take half of my stuff, when the enemy is like, nah, I'm going to take all my stuff, and we'll see who fights. So
yeah, that's it.
We always keep adding more batteries, more stuff, more technology, and
more
we find lightweight stuff, but we carry a lot of lightweight stuff now.
That's what I said. I was like, I'm in the light infantry, but nothing we carried was light. I was like, light infantry my ass. This is what we were always doing.
So you face this terrible injury. Let's talk about some of the successes you've had, because obviously you're doing physical tasks that are beyond, 90% of the population probably. You recently got married. Congratulations. I saw
thank you.
Pictures online.
Thank you.
Life seems to be going well. So what projects do you have out there? What are you doing with your life? And how can my audience find more of your work?
Absolutely. I just to put a sort of a bow on it, I got out of the military, recovered for the most part, still had some trouble with my movement, went back to my first love, which was martial arts, started teaching again. Okay. I have multiple black belts. I'm certified by Bruce Lee's protege, Guru Dana Santo, for Jeet Kune Do. So just being able to hold a blade correctly and get to a place where I could actually move it and do all those kind of warrior kind of drills, that's what helped me really get back to a place. And that led to speaking. There was a woman that heard me speak at a local thing that was saying, I want to buy your book. I'm like, ma'am, I don't have a book. And she just read me the riot act and wagged her finger at me. She had a granddaughter that was going through a divorce. Yeah. And she says, if you had a book, I could just give this to her, because I don't want to write a book. Nobody wants to write a book. You know how much work that is?
A lot.
You know how much work that is? Yeah. So it's like, I don't want to do that. But call it whatever you want. There were all these things pushing me that direction. And for me also, that gave me closure, because it forced me, because here's what happens. We hit adversity, we hit this trauma, and then we want to put as much distance between us and that as we can. It's like if you burn your finger on the stove as a kid, you want to get away from it. But for me, I had to sit there and face it. The wound is open. I had to just listen to it. The book was a way for me to completely get all that, because now I wrote down like 90 some odd lessons that I got from my injury. And I was like, well, I can't make 90 some odd chapters. How can I put these all together? The common thread here is determination. Common thread here is, beyond motivation, whatever. That led me to one of my editor actually sent me out a couple of applications for TEDx talks. And I was like, I don't want to do a TEDx talk. I don't have time for that. I'm not ready to do that. I'm not ready for that stage. And nobody called us back. So I was like, okay, no big deal. She sent out one more. And then I got the TEDx opportunity. The good thing was I already had a lot of the book written, so I was able to put that into the TEDx and then create something specific for them. The TEDx went, after it got released, the book came behind it. That's what kind of put me on the map. And so now, between being an author, being a speaker, being an executive coach, working with, whether it be leaders, CEOs, even actors and professional athletes now, those are the people that need these kind of things the most, because they get to this place where everybody's kind of being a yes man. Nobody tells them the truth. And I kind of punch them in the face with the truth in the most loving and respectful way that I can. So if you want to go to anywhere on LinkedIn, I'm on there for sure. Marcus Aurelius Anderson, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and then my website is Marcus Aurelius Anderson. If you like the TEDx talk, you can get the book at Amazon. And that's it. I'm working on my second book right now, and I have a couple of other things that are potentially going to be going on, but until I had them solidified, it's hard for me to give too much conjecture.
So I should say the audio book is on Audible too, because I've listened to it twice on Audible. I have to commend you for reading it yourself, and probably the more passionately read book I've ever listened to on Audible.
Man, I tried to release that on just this kind of, I'm pointing at my microphone, but it was so hard, so I just went to a professional. And I always say that I bleed onto the page when I was writing. So I tried to just bleed into that microphone when I gave it. And it's like a 5 or 6 hour book to listen to. So you can imagine how many takes and how much, but it's what you have to do. And again, to me, I was like, if you don't read the book, if you don't want to physically read the book, then in my opinion, that old school guy, then you shouldn't get the knowledge. But I'm realizing now that so many people, they consume this material in that way. And if that's what gets them, if that's the one thing that introduces them to Stoicism or to the idea that adversity is a gift, then I've won. So who am I to not want to meet somebody where they are? So that's it. Thank you.
Easy way to get more knowledge when you're out rucking.
Absolutely is. And it keeps you going whenever you're like, man, I'm out of water and my knee's killing me. It's like, suck it up, buttercup.
Well, thank you. I definitely appreciate you taking the time to be here with today. And I'll be looking out for your next book whenever it comes out and be published.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. For more videos on military self-development, military history, and product reviews related to military marching, I encourage you to subscribe to the Evolving Warfighter. Until next time, focus on your self-development so we can dominate the modern battlefield.